Welcome on in, football fans. It's your boy, Gsluke, here with our DFS and prop preview for Week 8 of the NFL season. Gonna get you ready for all of your exposure on Sunday, with first off a breakdown of the DFS side of what we're doing with our Draftkings lineups. That'll include our top quarterback stacks of the week, 4 game environments that I'll be getting Bill over the field on, and then afterwards we're gonna focus on the Underdog and the Prize Pick sides with some pick'em props and pick'em slips that have already entered on both sites, and a Hard Rock bet prop that have already mixed in as well. So by the end, you'll have a game plan for all of your exposure for this week. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get this thing going. Our first of 4 quarterback stacks is going to be Daniel Jones and the Colts going up against the Tennessee Titans, and we got a healthy total between these two divisional teams, 47.5 points on most of the sports books, but more importantly, the Colts side are favored by 2 touchdowns, so their team total is just soaring through the roof. Their players on offense and DFS are also going to be pretty popular as well. It's because they're some of the best projections that we have overall, and whether it's a Jonathan Taylor at running back or a Daniel Jones who's only $6,100 and has a 20 raw point projection, they're also going to be high owned in DFS contests. So a JT over 20% at that position. A Daniel Jones is 7.5% at quarterback. But if you're careful about who you're taking along with him or as a potential buyback on the Titans, you can find some low-owned diamonds in the rough. But let's talk about the stacking options first, which are pretty plentiful with almost all of his wide receivers healthy. You have a Pittman, a Warren at the tight end position. You go to a Downs, a Pierce at wide receiver as well. And it's worth noting that some of your leverage options on Indy do include Downs and Pierce that are some downfield wide receivers. But a Taylor, a Warren, or a Pittman that were some of your primary options are going to have some ownership behind them. And that's usually the case when we have a game total, a team total as high as what we have on the Indy side of things. And I don't think that you have to have a buyback though, but the buybacks are low owned. A Tony Pollard should only be about 5 or 6%, and Io Manor will be a little bit higher owned now that Calvin Ridley's been rolled out, but he's not going to be mega chalk at that wide receiver position. And even in a Conquo at tight ends, you're looking at sub 5% ownership that you can use as some differentiation. And it doesn't even have to be in the game stack itself where you're getting that leverage. You could use a value option at any of the other spots that you have available. So that's the intrigue of going to this sort of a lineup. And it's single entries in cash where we're not as worried about differentiation or not as worried about leverage in those kind of builds. Guys like a Daniel Jones and even some of the chalkier builds along with him make even more sense there. So I'll be using them in a lot of the builds, whether it's large field GPPs or in single entries or cash, but definitely prefer them in that second kind of format there. Next up, we got a Bo Nix going up against the Dallas Cowboys, a $6,000 price tag, and the highest total that we have on the main slate at 50.5 points. This is expected to be a shootout, and unlike the first game, it's got a much closer spread. So I would say that a buyback is more advisable in this kind of situation. We're expecting both teams to have a respectable offensive production, but I would say I prefer the Bo Nix side of this because they are the 3.5 point favorites, and also because the defensive matchup isn't as stiff. The Broncos, of course, are one of the best passing defenses in all of the NFL, whereas the Cowboys side of things have been leaking on that side of the ball all year. On top of that, Bo Nix has a lot more rushing upside than a Dak Prescott does, and while Prescott has shown a little bit more of that rushing ability over this season, Bo Nix has him cleared in bunches there. So he's the cheaper of the two. He's also $500 cheaper, but you're paying for that with the ownership. A Dak Prescott is only 2.9% owned. It's worth noting that I'll probably have some stacks with him in my large field GPPs, but just like a Daniel Jones here, you don't have to get your differentiation at that quarterback position. You could do it with some of the players that you're stacking them up with, or with the buybacks on the other side, or outside of that game stack entirely. And there's even some builds like the single entries in cash where it's not that big a deal if we're using somebody that's 10% owned. Those kind of formats, I love a Bo Nix here. So in terms of stacking options, we got a Sun that you can use. He should get a whole bunch of targets. And Ingram has really started to come on over the last couple weeks. So at tight end, you could use him for correlation as well. But for leverage options, guys that aren't going to be as highly owned, a Franklin, a Mims at wide receiver, a Harvey out of the backfield as well won't be very popular. A Dobbins will have some ownership, but probably won't be used very often as a stacking option with Nix. So there are ways where you can get creative if you need to. And on the other side of the game, I did mention that a buyback makes a little bit more sense here. The buyback options, because of the tough matchup, are not as popular as you might expect. A CD Lamb, for example, is a little bit over 10% owned. A Pickens is single digit owned. You have a sub 5% owned Ferguson. Williams is sub 10% owned. A Tolbert, a Turpin are sub 3% owned themselves. So you can't just use all the studs in this game to think that you're getting the differentiation, but if you throw in one outside, more creative option into it, you're going to have the differentiation that you're looking for. And, both of these quarterbacks, they're not low-owned, creative, diamonds in the rough per se, like the last two quarterback stacks are going to be, but in the right kind of formats, I think they make plenty of sense, and especially even in the large field GPPs, if you're just being very intentional about about where you're getting different to the field. Next up, we're starting to get to some of the different stacks. And it is worth noting, by the way, guys, you can download these sheets with my entire player pool, every single quarterback stack that I'll be using, all the projections across running back, wide receiver, you name it, on my Patreon page. NFL DFS tiers, how you get access to them. So links down below to go out there and check out the Patreon. Only $15 a month, by the way, to get access to all of these projections for main slate and for showdown for all the island games. So an absolute steal, no-brainer for you guys to check out. But Caleb Williams is going to be the next stack that we go through because they are going against this Ravens team, which should have Lamar Jackson back. He was practicing Friday, which is very optimistic for his chances to play on Sunday. And if Lamar is back, the Bears might be playing from behind, but that would be beneficial for this kind of a quarterback stack. The Ravens have also been extremely terrible against the opposing passing attacks, ranking bottom 5 in most passing metrics. Caleb Williams has also been very effective in 2025, both as a passer and as a rusher on the ground. And it's not like he's been breaking records or anything, but he's been very solid to start this year. And now he has a matchup that's plus a game environment where you might have to throw the ball if they're playing from behind. And of course, all the buybacks that you could possibly want on the Ravens side of things to go ahead and get some of that correlation too. So he's sub 5% owned. That's part of the intrigue in large field GPPs. He's maybe not my favorite play in single entries or cash because of his relatively low floor. I normally don't like playing quarterbacks that are underdogs in my cash and single entry lineups because their team totals are lower for a reason. Usually the 1.5 touchdown lines in that scenario aren't going to be juiced towards the over, but a Caleb Williams has a much better projection if we take a look at the sports books, and they're expecting this to be somewhat competitive. The Ravens are almost touchdown favorites because of the fact that Lamar Jackson is expected to play, but that's all favorable for Caleb Williams in a fantasy format. And I'm taking him with 1 to 2 pass catchers, just like the first few quarterbacks we've gone through. All of them do have that rushing aspect to them, so you could in theory play them naked, but on a large field GPP slate, a quarterback being optimal is going to take 25 to 30 points, and if one of these guys is scoring 25 to 30 points, they're not going to do that with their rushing upside alone. They're going to bring along at least one pass catching option, you would think, in most cases. So Caleb Williams, I'll be pairing up with an Adunze at wide receiver. A DJ Moore's expected to play. He was cleared of his questionable tag. He's an option there too. But Zacchaeus, he has shown quite a bit of chemistry with him here earlier this year. A Loveland, there is no Komet at tight end, so Loveland could be getting some extra looks at that position. A Swift, he is questionable as well, but is expected to be playing on Sunday. None of those players that we just talked about, maybe outside of Adunze, he'll be getting some ownership, I would say, especially in single entries or cash. The rest of these guys are like 5 to 7% at the most, and a lot of them are going to be sub 3 to 5% owned. So you're going to have a lot of leverage going to that bear side of things. And while I do think you're going to see people playing the Ravens stack trying to get early on Lamar Jackson, and because they've got to get wins right now, the Baltimore side, if they want any chance of making the playoffs, I think you're going to see people playing that side of things. But maybe the best way to get that exposure is to use them as a buyback. 1 or even 2 players from the Ravens. A Henry's projecting through the roof at only like $6,000. A Flowers and Andrews, a Hopkins, a Likely are all usable there too. And the thing that's beautiful, Flowers is going to be extremely high owned. Same thing with the Henry, but in Andrews, a Hopkins, a Likely, you're looking at sub 3 to 5% ownership in all those different cases. So just like some of these other stacks, you can get the differentiation on the other side of the ball. Let's say that you like the idea of using Caleb Williams and a Dunze as just your one-off stack there, and then maybe going to a buyback like a Henry. Well, that's okay. You can have some of the chalkier pieces in this game. Just get your differentiation outside of that game stack. It can be, the mini stack you're going with, where you're just taking 2 sides of a game against each other, going to a low-owned player there, or even with just a low-owned defense that you're using to differentiate yourself. I feel like a lot of people, when they're playing NFL DFS, feel like they have to have pivots across the board. You can have 2 to even 3, 4 chalky pieces in a lineup if you've got 2 to 3 pieces of leverage to offset that. So it's just about finding that fine balance when you're going through your lineup construction. And quarterbacks like Caleb Williams, especially just stacking that side in general, gives you that leverage that you're hoping for. So you can be chalkier with some of those other spots. And then finally, the last quarterback stack we're going to go through is going to be Joe Flacco in the Bengals. Crazy that he was on the Browns just a few weeks back, but it worked out for us a couple weeks back. We played him in Showdown as well against my Steelers. Hate that he took us down, but he was a great fantasy play that day, so I was able to at least get some money for that kind of performance. But this could be a big game for him. He's got a concentrated offense, some of the best weapons at wide receiver that you could possibly think of, and the Jets have performed well below expectations this year. I mean, over the last couple seasons, they've been a top 5, a top 10 defense almost every single time against the pass in particular. particular, they've been relatively skilled, but now they've got some injuries in the secondary. I think they're going to be susceptible, especially to the big play. You have Jamar Chase just getting spam targets at the wide receiver position. So I want 1 to 2 pass catchers with a Flacco. I would even go to 3 in some cases if he's going to get to the optimal performance, because if we're going to get 25 to 30 points out of Flacco, he's got no rushing upside. It's going to be a whole bunch of passing yards, probably 350, maybe even 400 yards, 3 to 4 touchdowns for him to have that kind of day. And in that scenario, he's bringing on at least 1 pass catcher. We know that for certain, but probably at least 2 and maybe even 3, like I was saying. So you have a Jamar Chase. You can even use a Brown out of the backfield as a little bit of correlation as well. But a T. Higgins, a Yoshi Vosh at wide receiver. You've got some low-end options in there too. And most notably, the last 3 that we went through is where you can get most of that differentiation. A Chase Brown, he's going to have some ownership. Obviously, Jamar Chase, he's over 30% owned in large field GPPs, so you're not really getting differentiation there. But a Higgins, a Fant, Yoshi Vosh should all be sub 5% owned. It's like the first stack. I don't think you have to have a buyback in every single case. Kind of like the Titans, you've got a sorry offense in the Jets that you don't feel real good about, especially without a Garrett Wilson. But Breece Hall's going to get a whole bunch of usage out of the backfield, both as a running back and as a wide receiver. You've got a Reynolds at wide receiver. Mason Taylor, he's been really good over the last month with all the injuries that they've had on offense. Or even good old Alan Lazard at the wide receiver position could be used for some of that buyback leverage. And all of these game stacks, whether they're the high-owned or the lower-owned game stacks, we're just trying to get game environments, matchups that are plus for these quarterbacks. And if they're low-owned, that's an added bonus. And if they're highly owned, we just have to make sure that we're getting creative when we're using them. So those are my top 4 quarterback stacks of the week. A few examples of game environments I'm getting over the field on, and hope to see you guys at the top end of the GPPs. And now for the prop and the betting side, where I've got some exposure you might want to tail yourself for the Sunday slate. And we're going to start on Underdog with a 4-leg slip, which pays 10x if we end up going 4-0. And it's going to be 4 unders on fantasy points, which have been a moneymaker for me in 2025. And the reason for that is that they're a half-point PPR website. Sites like Prize Picks are a full-point PPR. Most people are used to that kind of scoring, so they oftentimes take overs on Underdog, and they take advantage of that by posting inflated lines. And in all these different cases we're about to go through, these are inflated projections. So let's start with Jalen Waddle. So Jalen Waddle has a 61-yard receiving line, which is pretty solid, but he's got a 5.5 reception yard line there. Keep in mind that if we combine these two, that's about 8.5 fantasy points, at least without his touchdown equity. And because he is plus 175 to score nearly minus 200 for the no on the sites that have both the yes and the no available, that's only putting him at about, at best, maybe a 10-point projection. But the best way to compare this is to look at Prize Picks. At Prize Picks, he's at a 13-point projection with the half-point PPR accounted for on Underdog. That would be putting him down at 10.5 points. You can see at 11.35 points, that is a 0.85 fantasy point difference. But we've got to add on top of that a lot of the sports books have Waddle juiced towards the under. He's not favored to go over the 61.5 very often. He's got such little touchdown equity that we don't have to consider that as seriously as we do with some of the other players that we'll have on this list. It's just far too optimistic for the game environment that's at hand. And it's a tough matchup against the Falcons. They have a pretty talented secondary, not an elite tier unit like the Broncos or anything, but top 10 in the league is certainly something that's respectable. And 11.35 points is something that I'll take the under on. And the next one we got here is Michael Pittman Jr. at 11.45 points. And it's the same exact idea. We've got the half-point PPR scoring not really being accounted for here because on Prize Picks he's at a 12-point projection. So it's only about a 0.55 point difference, and he's at a 5 reception line on the books. So kind of like a Waddle, we have to make that kind of adjustment. And if you do so, it's an even bigger gap when you look at that difference, because if you subtract the 2.5 points from that 12 projection, then he should be down at about 9.5 fantasy points. And on Underdog, he's at 11.45. So that's where you get that kind of difference in the line value to attack. And just like we had with the Waddle, he doesn't have all that much touchdown equity. You have all those different wide receivers and running backs on Indy that are going to be taking that away from him. So he's favored to go under on that. He's at a 4.5 reception line. He is juiced towards the over, but only has a 48.5 yard receiving line. So without a touchdown, it's going to be real tough for him to go over that sort of number. And another piece of value that will exploit. Next one we got is Ramondre Stevenson for the under on fantasy points as well. And these running backs, it's not as prevalent to find the fantasy score under value, but you can, like you'll see in the cases of these two running backs that we're about to go through. But it's the same exact kind of idea. Stevenson is favored not to score. He's plus 100, plus 105 to score on a lot of the books that don't even have the no option. So when we get the two-way markets, which aren't currently available on Ramondre, I'm assuming he's going to be minus 140 to minus 150 not to score. So you still have to incorporate that, but we'll maybe give him 2.5 points of touchdown equity if he's slightly favored to go under and score. But he's only got a 49.5 yard rushing yard line, only an 11.5 receiving yard line, and though he's at 2.5 receptions, it's a half point PPR sort of website. And when we take a look at a site like Prize Picks that has him at a lower projection than what he's listed at here, and that's a full PPR website as opposed to the half point PPR like we have on Underdog, it becomes an obvious value. So it's a 0.75 difference. He's at 11.5 on Prize Picks, and you have that 0.5 scoring instead. That's what makes that one value. And on top of it, Cleveland is a tough matchup on defense, kind of like we had in this first one with Jalen Waddle. It's a tough secondary that he's playing against. Michael Pittman Jr. and the Tennessee defense, they've actually not been that great this year, so he doesn't have the worst matchup in history. But this last one's another tough matchup too, and that would be the DeAndre Swift under at 13.25 fantasy points. He's at 12.5 fantasy score in Prize Picks, so also lower, and that's despite the half PPR scoring. If we take a look at his projections, he's at 53.5 rushing yards, 16.5 receiving yards, and just like Ramondre, 2.5 reception yard line, but it's not the same as Prize Picks. It's the half point PPR scoring, so the fact that he's 0.75 points higher on Underdog and you have that kind of a scoring difference just makes absolutely no sense. So you can see why there's value on these sort of a props on Underdog because of the scoring and the way that they price it compared to some of the other sites out there. And if you're careful about it, you find it matchup based, finds ones that are a little bit tougher than most, then you can even further exploit that kind of value. So that's what we're doing there. It's a 10x payout if you take that for the power play and Underdog. A little bit of a lottery slip, but if you end up entering, 4 or 5 of these lotteries and you're taking value on them in every single case, you're going to grind out really good long-term ROI. So that's the idea there. Don't use the same exact unit size that you would on like a 2 or a 3 leg slip. You scale it down when you're going to these 4-mans, but a lot of value that's involved when you can find plus EV value across all the different legs. And on the Prize Pick side, we're going to be taking a 3-legger this time for a 6x payout. So first prop's going to be the Rachaad White over on touchdowns. He's close to minus 130 on a lot of the books to score. So I have a feeling that this might become a goblin by the time we get closer to lock. You've got the big favorites being the Tampa Bay side, so game script should be favorable towards some rushing usage. And even as a backup early this year, Rachaad White was their preferred running back in the red zone, mostly because of his versatility. He can block if they need to pass. He can, of course, run between the tackles as well. And now that Bucky Irving has been rolled out for yet another week, he's going to be shouldering that load in that offense. And they've got one of the higher team totals of any team this week. You have that minus 130 odds. I'll mix it in at even money pretty much all day. So that'll be the first leg we mix in. Second one is going to be a Javonte Williams over on touchdowns. They're going up against the Broncos defense, which is a very stout passing defense. So I think when they get in the red zone, they're going to be more rushing heavy this time around. And you have Javonte Williams as the clear number 1 running back in that game. It's a 50.5 point total. So while they are the slight underdogs against the Broncos, it's one of the higher totals. Both offenses competent, expected to be in it throughout the entire game. I think all of that's going to help with Javonte there. And just like a Rachaad White, he's close to minus 130 towards the over on most of the major sports books. So it wouldn't surprise me if we get closer to lock, especially with the total there. People are going to be betting over on touchdowns like crazy, whether it's on the Broncos or that Cowboys side of things. Would not surprise me if both of those became a goblin at some point. So I'm mixing them in right now before we get the two-way markets available. And usually that's when Prize Picks tends to adjust the odds on these anytime touchdowns, is when the pinnacle market is at like minus 130 or more. But when that's not available, they don't have that to adjust to yet. And based on the sportsbook odds on Draftkings and FanDuel, I think it's a really good chance that that ends up being the case. And the last prop we'll go through will be an under on Chuba Hubbard on rushing attempts. He's at 10.5, and on a site like FanDuel, he's minus 144 towards the under. And a real reason for that would be that Dowdle was carving out more of a role for himself. Even in the platoon role last week, he had by far the more efficient of the two performances. And it's not just a 1 week thing, right? 2 weeks before that, Dowdle went for over 200 total yards. So I think that it's his offense to gain. He's probably going to be closer to 60 to 65% usage rate when it's all said and done. Last week, it was truly 50-50 between those two players, but it would be extremely surprising if that was the case once again. And they're in a negative game script against the Bills. The Bills are the big favorites in that kind of a matchup, so they're not projected to run the ball more than maybe 20 times as a team. And if they run the ball 20 times, you're going to have some kind of quarterback rushing usage, a little bit less with Andy Dalton at that position. But even if it's 20 totes between those two running backs, I would give the 12 to Dowdle, maybe 8 to Chuba Hubbard at this point. I mean, if it were up to me, I'd probably give Dowdle 15 carries and Chuba 5, but even if we're more conservative about it, it's still solid line value towards the under. So a little 6xer if we hit on that, a plus EV because of the kind of value that we're getting in all three spots, and worthy of adding to some of your exposure for Sunday. And then lastly, we've got a prop on Hard Rock Bet that I went out there and mixed in. This is an over on Barkley rushing yards at 99.5, so got to post 100 plus. I got him at plus 175, so unfortunately did get slightly worse, probably because of me and my Patreon page hammering that kind of a line, but still a solid thing to go out there and sprinkle in for some exposure, because the Giants lit up 96.5 rushing yards per game, and that's on average. You have Barkley, who's a much better than average running back, and he could be out for a little bit of revenge. Not only did they lose the last time out in what was an extremely surprising outcome for myself and probably a lot of you out there, but now they lost that game. It's a team that he formerly used to play against in a matchup that's plus as well. So I'm mixing that in. Again, I got slightly better odds than what you can currently get on that sort of lean, but still probably worth a half unit sprinkle or so. But for the rest of my exposure that you guys want to play on these pick'em sites or on the sports books like Hard Rock Bet, make sure to check out my Patreon page for that. NFL Prop Tier is how you get access to every single bet that I'm entering for this week. That's on the pick'em sites, Hard Rock Bet. I give you guys all the exposure, every single idea of why I'm playing it, so that you can learn how to find prop value for yourself. And it's not just a spoon-fed website where you get bets and that's it. I truly try and make you guys a better of the NFL. I show you how to do your plus EV research, how to do traditional analysis, how to put together slips, how to do bankroll management to be a better overall fantasy player. All of that on the Patreon page. So check it out if you guys haven't already, and let's get after it. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the Week 8 preview. Go ahead, smash that like button if you guys haven't already. Also subscribe to the channel so you guys don't miss any of the content to come. That'll include our showdown previews, also our main slate breakdowns for every single week throughout the rest of the 2025 season. But that's all I've got. I appreciate your support here on the channel as per usual. Go ahead and smash that like button if you guys didn't do it before, but also comment down below who you've got as the top scorer for the main slate for a chance to earn a free month on my Patreon page. And on there is where you can get all the projection sheets that you saw before with up-to-date projections, ownership, my entire player pool for this Sunday. Also every single bet that I'm taking on Underdog, Prize Picks, and sports books, all for free if you get that top scorer correct. And it'll be on a first come, first served basis. So once a player's taken once, they cannot be taken again. Go ahead, claim your player before anyone else ends up stealing them from you. And best of luck with everything that you're going with. I hope to see a lot of your names towards the top end of the GPPs. Let's try and take at least a couple contests down. Let's cash out on our prop exposure as well. And if we could hit it on one of the 10xers, a 6xer, that plus 165, that'd be pretty nice to add to the bankroll this week. But that's all I've got. I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you guys throughout the rest of the year.